In the previous video we got a bit philosophical and possibly a bit confused, and I apologise for that. The best argument for realising the truth of these teachings is realisation itself, which isn't really any argument at all. And I pointed out that we can't really get to the truth through philosophical debate. But on the other hand, we should test our realization. We should allow it to be subjected to philosophical analysis. Because this isn't simply a subjective experience. Realization is not simply a subjective experience. It needs to make sense. It needs to be consistent. We need to cross-examine our realization. I once had the good fortune to have a little conversation with Douglas Harding, the author of On Having No Head. And when I met him, I was reading another of his books, and it was called The Trial of the Man Who Said He Was God. And he was very enthusiastic about this book, because it was the book in which he considered every possible objection, every imaginable objection to what he described as headlessness or headless seeing, or what I would describe as the realization of headlessness. So yes, we can't just assume that we've stumbled on the absolute truth. We need to be challenged on this. It needs to be examined. And this is obviously what happened at the time of the Lankavatara Sutras. There were various philosophical schools that said this is the way things are. And although realization is not a philosophy, although the heart of Buddhism is not a philosophy, it needs to be able to withstand philosophical criticism. This criticism could come from scientific grounds, religious grounds, or purely philosophical grounds. And at the time of the Lankavatara Sutra, which was probably about 1600 years ago, there was fierce debate going on in India about the nature of truth, of understanding, of knowledge. And you still see this enacted in the debate of the Tibetans. That spirit still carries on. So as I said, I think things got a little bit confused in the previous video. It wasn't quite clear what the verses were getting at, but I think the next couple of verses clear it up somewhat, or they express the same thing in a more concise manner. So let's have a look at them. Verse 573. In a transmigration that has no beginning, an objective world nowhere obtains. When there is no nourishing mind, where can an objective semblance take its rise? So this verse is clearly arguing against the notion or the understanding of an objective world. I think we can take this in a pretty straightforward way. An objective world is one which is like a constant factor. We've got all these human beings and other entities going around, foraging around and doing their thing. And they're doing it in this objective world. It's like the world's stage, and it's a pretty fixed thing. There's a lot of change going on, but there is this thing called an objective world in which there is all this change going on. So in a transmigration that has no beginning, well, this obviously refers to the idea, which was accepted by many Indian philosophical schools. It's kind of something, it seems to be something which is in the Indian DNA, to believe in countless lives, countless rebirths. This is just one life out of many. There's a transmigration of something, of the soul, of consciousness or whatever, from one birth to the next. I say it's in the Indian DNA, but I think it was common in ancient cultures. Ancient cultures noticed the rhythmic, cyclic nature of things, so it's natural to assume that life and death are also cyclic. But we had a look at a more pertinent meaning of transmigration back in verse 551. The transmigration really is the transmigration of the attention. It's the attention which goes out from itself and identifies with a body or an object. This is the transmigration. As it becomes aware of something, as it identifies with something, it becomes that thing. Awareness is lost and there's simply the object of awareness. So transmigration is the transmigration of the attention. And it's always going on. It's always going on. This is consciousness at play. There has always been consciousness. It's not my consciousness, because the notion of my consciousness is part of the play. It's something eternal. So in a transmigration that has no beginning, an objective world nowhere obtains. When there is no nourishing mind, where can an objective semblance take its rise? In other words, the notion of an objective reality comes from the nourishing mind. And this is the mind with its habits. A certain pattern gets set up, a certain pattern of the attention, of the transmigrating attention. Certain patterns get locked into, certain notions get locked into, notions of an individual and an objective world get locked into. Consciousness gets locked into these notions and forgets its non-dual, non-objective nature. So an objective world is also a world with objects, apparently independent objects, interacting with each other. So in other words, this verse is saying that this apparently objective world is only there because of certain mental habits. And it's not really there at all, because mental habits are simply that. They're of the nature of imagination. They belong to the world of ideas, of mental abstractions. This is the world we inhabit. This is the world which, as enlightenment practitioners, we wake up from. We wake up from. So that's fine. It's the next verse which is a little bit contentious. 574. If there is any growth from nothingness, horns will grow on a hare. Let no discrimination take place, thinking that something grows out of nothing. So this is arguing against the conventional understanding. At one point there was nothing. This is the religious and scientific understanding. When I say scientific understanding, I mean the broadly accepted, what is broadly accepted as scientific understanding. So at one point there was nothing, and then there was an event, the creation of the Big Bang, and things developed from there. So in science we've got the story of evolution, and this verse is arguing against that. It's saying if there was any growth from nothingness, if there was an evolution from nothingness, then we'd find a hare with horns. So the writer, obviously enough, doesn't know about the theory of evolution, which gives us some understanding of the parameters by which things come to be. It's not purely random. It's random in the sense of random genetic mutations, but then you've got the survival of the fittest, which weeds out these mutations. So you could have horns growing on a hare, feasibly. So you could feasibly have horns growing on a hare, but it's something which would have to have had some evolutionary ancestry. So this argument doesn't hold up. This argument against the notion, against the understanding that an objective world developed out of nothing. There are many other better arguments against the notion of an objective world, but this certainly isn't one of them. But we can still follow the advice given in the last part of this verse. Let no discrimination take place, thinking that something grows out of nothing. We step back from the notion of this objective world, understand that it's an apparent coalescing of our mental constructs, our psychological disposition, influenced by the culture or subculture that we inhabit. We step back from this process. We step back from these two svabhavas, the two knowledges, and come back to the truth, the realization of our own awareness. In this, there's no discrimination going on.